Thru hikers are a unique subset of people within the hiking and backpacking world. These are the folks who hike hundreds or even thousands of miles from the start of a long trail all the way through to the end. And because they hike 20 miles a day for weeks and months on end, they need specialized gear that is both functional and light. In fact, the lighter, the better. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and we just completed our test of the best ultralight backpacking gear. And during this test, I got to hang out with a handful of thru hikers and regular backpackers too. I found out that there's some things that they've learned along the way that can help any outdoorsman, including hunters. So today on the podcast, I'm talking with senior staff writer Laura Lancaster, who's working on reviews of the best ultralight packs, tents, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Here's what you need to know about ultralight gear and why traditional backpacking gear should become obsolete. Okay, Laura, so we just finished hiking a section of the Pacific Crest Trail. We're doing what is now our annual ultralight backpacking gear test. This is totally new to me. I'm not a backpacker. I'm more of a backcountry hunter. So I was really just tagging along, trying to learn, experiencing some of this new gear with you guys. But maybe to kick us off in this conversation, could you tell me about just what the Pacific Crest Trail is and why it's important to the history of ultralight gear?
You bet, Alex. Well, the Pacific Crest Trail is a 2,600-mile long trail that goes from the American border with Mexico in the south up to the border with Canada in the north. And along the way, it is not trying to make things easy for hikers. It's trying to stay along the crest of the mountains as much as possible. So in California, that would mean the Sierras. In Oregon and Washington State, that would mean the Cascades and everything else in between. As you can imagine, this takes hikers through some really challenging terrain. And when this trail was first completed, it wasn't very easy for people to finish. Most people couldn't finish it inside of a calendar year because of some of the limitations of the seasons. You kind of have to wait until the snow has melted enough in the Sierras to start hiking through that, maybe mid-June, if you're lucky, in a good year. And then you have to finish through the North Cascades before it starts snowing again. And that can happen as soon as mid-September. So it's not a long time to complete a hike. And people were trying to figure out ways to get this done. And then sort of a mad genius named Ray Jardine started experimenting with really cutting a lot of weight from his backpack, cutting things from his backpack that people didn't think that you should be cutting away back then. And he published a book about this in 1991. And this sort of is what started, I would say, the trend, the craze, however you want to term it, towards ultralight gear that we are still living through today. And the upshot is that now lots of people can complete the Pacific Crest Trail inside of a calendar year, thanks to the added speed and mileage that they can get in through a day with carrying lighter weight gear than they were previously.
Yeah, and you are one of those people, right? You did that. You thru hiked this trail, didn't you?
Yeah, I feel like I was very lucky to thru hike the trail back in 2014, which ended up being a really nice year to hike, both for snow levels in the Sierras and also for wildfires. Today's hikers have to contend with all kinds of crazy new problems as wildfires take over the West, and we see really inconsistent snowpacks in both the Cascades and in the Sierra. So 2014 was a great year to finish. But I definitely couldn't have done it without ultralight gear.
Okay, so during our backpacking test, I was only there for 3 days of hiking. So I feel like I got just a tiny little taste of thru hiking culture, I guess I'd call it, which is really interesting and bizarre and wonderful. And I think it's something that not a lot of people, even people who are backpackers, I think it's something that not a lot of people understand. But I do think that kind of understanding the thru hiker's mentality helps us better understand like where the gear is coming from. So one of the things that I noticed about just thru hikers in general is that you guys don't seem to care at all about how stuff looks. Like some of the tents and some of the backpacks just look, it looks like they're made out of like garbage bags or something. Which is interesting to me, because they're really high quality products. But in the rest of the outdoor world, the outdoor gear world, which I'm familiar with, like the high end products look really amazing. There's a lot of thought put into the aesthetics of the gear, where that just like doesn't seem to exist in through hiking. So
this is so funny to hear to me, because I think a lot of sort of traditional style gear just looks ridiculous because it's so unnecessarily complicated and there's so many bells and whistles. And I'm just like, cut that off, cut this off. We don't need any of that. And I'm like, all I want is a garbage bag to carry into the mountains. The most comfortable garbage bag I can get. And actually, through hikers do use garbage bags, typically, like trash compactor bag inside of your backpack in lieu of a backpack rain cover is like standard fare among through hikers. So
yes, I can see it. So it's not that you all don't care about how products look. You just have a different taste in what looks nice, maybe.
Yeah, I think that through hikers as a group are so obsessed with functionality that once they know something works well and is light and is cost effective, or even if it's not cost effective, frankly, then that kind of becomes like the product du jour and will be coveted by backpackers and through hikers. So I think that it's probably just a different area of aesthetic, like what it is that people are looking for. So
yeah. Can you talk more about just the through hiker mentality in general? Because I think this will help us understand the second half of the conversation.
Sure. So I tend to think of backpacking in general as being composed of two groups. There's people who backpack to camp and there's people who backpack to hike. So in the backpacking to camp group, it's like maybe you're going in a couple of miles to a beautiful lake and then you're planning to just hang out there for like the rest of the day and the next day and then like hike a couple of miles out again. And the backpacking to hike people are people who are backpacking because they want to get as far and as deep into the wilderness and see as much as they possibly can. So then you would have 15, 20 for through hikers, 25-mile days would be really standard fare. And in those kinds of situations, it becomes like a lot less important, like where you camp actually will probably be not an especially visually appealing place, like because you're carrying gear that's not really designed to withstand all of the elements of like camping out on a ridge. So maybe you're going to put yourself like somewhere low where it's more protected. So that answer the question a little bit.
Yeah, you guys just don't care about stuff that normal people care about.
Yeah, a big joke in through hiking land is that hiker midnight is 8 o'clock. Because it's like after you've like hiked all day, you like get to camp and you like set up your tent and you roll out your sleeping bag and then you're just out. You're just gone until the next morning and then you're just going to pack up and start hiking again. So
yeah, you want to be able to set up your tent, eat your food, and get to sleep as quickly as possible. And then just pack it all up and get back on the trail as quickly as possible.
Yeah. If you're really doing it right, your dinner will actually happen before you set up camp. It'll be like your evening break. Like maybe at like 5 o'clock, you like eat your dinner and then you pack it away again and you like hike for 5 more miles and then you set up camp. Okay. You just keep going after that.
Okay. Got it. So yes, it's all like we're just covering ground here. We're spending as much time on the trail as possible, as little time messing around with extra gear as possible.
Yeah.
So with this in mind, while like right before we left for this gear test, you wrote a story about how traditional backpacking is dead. And basically the point you were making is that there's not a need to use this heavier traditional backpacking gear because there's kind of all this available ultralight gear that does everything that traditional backpacking gear does. It just does it at a lighter weight. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because there's some interesting feedback on that piece and I'm curious to know how you're thinking about it all now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that probably the first thing to say is that ultralight is a really nebulous term. Within the through hiking community, it specifically denotes like a base weight, which is the weight of all of your gear minus food, fuel, and water. People are looking for a base weight of 10 pounds or less, which is like extremely light. I'm not sure that I've ever had a base weight that was 10 pounds or less. But when we talk about ultralight gear, that's kind of a really broad term that's meant to denote a group of cottage gear companies that sort of sprung up to meet the needs of through hikers on long distance trails. It's really common, especially for the Pacific Crest Trail, for people to, when they're starting to plan out their through hike, to completely change every single piece of gear that they're using because whatever they had before was too heavy or inadequate in some way. So these cottage gear companies sprang up to sort of meet that specific need. And I think what gets lost there is that difference between the 10-pound base weight and what the thru hikers are actually carrying. When you're in the desert of the Pacific Crest Trail, like you'll sometimes have like 6 days of food and 6 liters of water on your back. Like your 10-pound base weight has now ballooned. You're now carrying like 30, 35 pounds. Like if you're a larger person, like maybe even more if you need even more water than that. And so these backpacks can handle those loads. They can handle way more than like 15 or 20 pounds. And they carry comfortably at those loads too, or as comfortably as 40 pounds can possibly feel. And I think that what people are missing out on is that this sort of very rigid framed internal frame style of backpack that we become so accustomed to isn't the only way to comfortably carry a load in the backcountry, that there are other ways to do it too, and that those other ways might be more comfortable for you. So there's innovative techniques to carrying heavier loads that these companies have come up with that I think are ready for prime time.
Yeah, well, let's get into specifics here. And since, we kind of started with backpacks, let's focus on that category. Can you mention one or two of the packs from the test that are doing what you talked about and kind of describe, who makes them, what they do, and why, they kind of fit this mission of carrying a load comfortably, but differently than, the internal frame packs that I'm used to and a lot of backpackers are used to.
Yeah. I think it's probably worth saying to start that a lot of these companies are not new companies. They've been around for a long time. So if Outdoor Life readers are familiar with them, with some of them, I wouldn't be surprised. The most interesting one to me that we tried out on this testing trip was a company out of New Zealand called ARN. And they are thinking about how to suspend load on the human frame just completely differently than the internal frame backpacks, where an internal frame backpack is sort of trying to position the load directly onto your hips from the back and sort of perfectly balance that load in that position. ARN is trying to sort of have the weight like envelope your entire body so that the weight on the front of your pack is sort of canceling out the weight on the back of your back. And this pack looks like completely bizarre. Like I've never seen a pack like this in my life. And the way that you fit it onto your body is completely different. You adjust the back panel to your frame almost at the very end after you've adjusted the shoulder straps and the hip belt and the sternum strap. And it completely changes how you experience carrying weight and how it feels on your body and how it constricts your body's range of motion when you're hiking. So that one was a real eye opener for me.
It almost felt like wearing like an exoskeleton or something. That's the pack that like moved with you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would like flex and move with you, and it was stable and it supported the weight. But the way it was designed, you were able to like twist your shoulders and rotate your hips in ways that you would never be able to do if you were like strapped down with a internal frame backpack with the hip belt tightened up and just the way that you would wear one of those packs. They do restrict motion.
Yeah.
And this did the opposite of that.
Yeah, in a way that was really compelling, and it makes you wonder why this style of backpack hasn't had more play. The only other backpack we've tested that sort of uses some of these ideas, I'm speaking very loosely here because it is not the same backpack, is the Six Spoons Design Swift X, which also sort of allows you to wrap the pack and the weight like around your body, more like it's hugging you. And so you can move really freely because it's not using stiff pieces of hip belt or stiff pieces of shoulder strap to sort of like lock it in place on you. But yeah, I've been really surprised when people have used those two different packs, like what their experience has been, like how much more comfortably it carries for some groups of people. Another group of backpacks that's also taking off is sort of removable backpacks, like with removable internal frames. So that kind of allows you to have like the best of both worlds. If you're carrying like an especially heavy load, you can put the internal frame in, position all of the weight on your hips, pull down on those load lifters, and like continue up your mountain on your way. But then if you're carrying a load that's a little bit lighter and you don't want to carry the load with all of that pressure on your hips and like on your clavicle, then you can take the internal frame out and sort of have it wrap around you in sort of like more of that bear hug. And so what was interesting about that was that this is the first year that we tested a sort of a mainstream brand that had a backpack like that, the Black Diamond Beta Light. This is a style of backpack that has like been used by cottage gear companies like ULA and Durston and Z-Packs for a long time. So it's interesting to see a mainstream brand starting to pick up on these ideas.
Yeah. How do you feel about mainstream brands coming into this space, which, you before described as mostly driven by cottage companies that are, smaller, kind of dealing with a very specific audience. And now you have Black Diamond. There's also an Osprey pack in our test, which everyone liked. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, Osprey is sort of it's a specific example unto itself because Osprey, people have been using Ospreys almost since the beginning. Osprey is like figured out some kind of magic that only they can do where you can get amazing backflow ventilation and great support on your hips. And they have a specific backpack in their lineup called the Exos that they have sort of dialed in for people that are looking for lightweights, even though that technology is sort of throughout their entire line. So I actually give a lot of credit to them for choosing to have a pack that is geared towards like the lightweight and ultralight set, because I think a lot of other brands sort of don't know what to do with that space exactly. But yeah, when it comes to that Black Diamond backpack that we tested, what was most surprising to me was that it wasn't a competitive price point. Like you would think a big brand with all of those resources would come in with a pack that was able to beat the price points of the cottage companies, and it didn't.
Yeah, it was more expensive.
And it didn't provide a lot of value over those other brands either. So yeah, so I'm going to stay curious to what Black Diamond will do with that backpack in the future, because it was like definitely a solid entry into the world of ultralight backpacking. But I feel like they could lean in more to their understanding of like how to have a pack like ride high and comfortably than they did in this initial burst. So
yeah,
that was my takeaway.
Yeah, interesting. How about the world of tents? What do you see happening there? Ultralight tents?
I think that what's always been really challenging about the world of ultralight tents is that it does take a certain amount of both like technical know-how to set up a trekking pole tent and bravery to say, I'm going to commit to figuring out a way to get this thing staked in, because otherwise it will not stand up. That has been like really limiting for people for a long time and has made people feel like they have to stick with sort of the mainstream tents like the MSR, Hubba Hubba. But I think that there are more and more freestanding tents in the ultralight space, and that they're at like a variety of price points too, which I hope will start to make people feel more comfortable. And I also think that the cottage gear companies have been doing a good job of simplifying some of the setup of the trekking pole tents, where it doesn't require the same level of sophistication to get that taut, secure setup, or the same number of stakes for that matter. So yeah, a few tents that we tested in that vein. We tested the Seek Outside Sunlight, which is a tent that everyone in the test was really impressed by. And that is a brand that is more in that lightweight, ultralight hunting space. And so it was really interesting to see what the thru hikers in the group thought of it. They were less familiar with the brand, but they were like very curious about it. So I'm interested to see if that brand starts to like move over into that group as we go forward into the future. And then another tent that was really interesting to check out was the Gossamer Gear Whisper, which is this 10.1 ounce, so way under a pound tent that sets up with 2 trekking poles and 7 stakes. And it almost reminds you of like a tarp setup, like a classic camping tarp setup. And those are really difficult to set up for people that like aren't familiar with like all the intricacies of like various like knot ties and how to create tension, before you have like an erect setup. And it was so interesting to see how well that tent set up for people who had never succeeded at setting up a trekking pole tent like that before. So I was really impressed by that design.
Yeah, I think they have a long way to go in reaching the more general audience though, right? Like
yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that the freestanding tents that we checked out, the Mountain Hardwear Nimbus, the Z-Packs,
and the Sling Fin.
I think that those have like a ton of appeal. And also we checked out a big Agnes tent, the Fly Creek. And the Fly Creek and the Mountain Hardwear and the Z-Packs tent are all 2-person tents that are under 2.5 pounds. So you can get that lightweight that can get you closer to that 10-pound base weight without opting for a trekking pole tent. So, but I also think that trekking pole tents are going to start to get a little bit more popular as the people who design them get better at explaining how to set them up for the first time and making the designs sort of beginner friendly.
Yeah. I will say the Seek Outside tent was super easy to set up. It was really fast. It was intuitive. It's not hard. It's not any more difficult than setting up a regular tent. So I can see that one translating really well. It also looks like a tent. I think that has something to be said about it, for just a regular backpacker camper. It looks very familiar.
No, if anything, it's even more classic. It's almost like you're a Boy Scout in the 1950s or something like that, with like triangle shape.
Exactly.
Two sides staked out. So
we'll be right back after the break.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
We're going to take a quick detour here because this isn't really about base weight, but I think it is related to ultralight and through hiking. And I know this is something that's very important to you. And I think it's probably going to be very important to people too. But explain the personal vendetta that you have against traditional hiking boots. And I'm talking about boots with like the thick rubber soles, leather upper.
Yeah.
They go above the ankle and they weigh, each boot weighs, 1.5 pounds or 1 pound or so. What's bad about those?
Yeah. This is always a hard one for me to tackle in a way that I feel is being fair to the field, because as you know, I am so far on the other side of this that I think trail runners are dumb. I have been wearing.
You mean trail running shoes?
Yeah,
not the trail runners themselves. Yeah,
trail runners are great, but I'm like, the Hoka Speed Goat looks ridiculous to me. So I wear barefoot shoes for everything. I've done both of my through hikes in barefoot style shoes. Yeah. So anyways, to start with that disclaimer and to back up, when we were first through hiking the PCT back in 2014, we had already left behind hiking boots because, again, when your goal is to hike from Mexico to Canada and you're willing to do anything, and someone tells you, hey, did you know more people are finishing this in trail runners and hiking boots? People are just like, where's a trail runner? Like, I'll buy that. I'll do anything to get this done. So we already left that world, and we were in the world of the Brooks Cascadia, which is like a very traditional kind of trail runner with sort of like a really high heel drop and a kind of a narrow toe box, but lots of cushioning. And since then, the Ultra Lone Peak has sort of risen to become the shoe du jour among thru hikers, and nothing seems to be able to shake it from that place. And if you're not familiar with what the Ultra Lone Peak is, the Ultra Lone Peak is essentially a barefoot style shoe that has 25 millimeters of cushioning. So it has a hugely wide toe box. It has no arch support in it. And the reason why this is helpful for thru hikers is that it allows their foot room to expand. And more importantly, it allows their foot room to function naturally. Like their toes can bend as they hike. Their heels can bend fully as they hike. Their arch can like splay out and like absorb some of that shock as they're moving through like the gait cycle as they're hiking. And this is really important for thru hikers because the number one thing that takes people off trail is overuse injuries. And a thing that people don't realize, I think, when they're using these big, heavy hiking boots is that if you are not feeling that pain in your foot, that means that all of that shock has gone someplace else in your body. So if you're wondering, like, why do I have all these knee problems in my hiking boots? It could be the hiking boots that are causing this problem. So that's my spiel. There's also a big misunderstanding about, hiking boots, hiking shoes, they're kind of the same thing because I don't think that people understand the role of the uppers in hiking boots. The uppers are only there to like protect you against maybe like knocking your foot against a rock or keeping dirt out, but they're not going to prevent you from rolling your ankles. They don't have that kind of stiffness to them, Like ski boots are going to stop you from breaking your ankle because they're made out of a hard plastic side. And mountaineering boots are like this too. But hiking boots are not doing that work for you. So if you're thinking that you need to wear a hiking boot because you have weak ankles, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you to completely change everything you're doing tomorrow, but you could switch to a hiking shoe and notice no loss of functionality because that is only there as a placebo effect.
Yeah, I think there's also, you're talking about the Barefoot Shoes, which, is kind of seems to be the favorite among a lot of thru hikers. But also,
I wouldn't say that. I would say thru hikers generally do not wear barefoot shoes because it's just a lot of impact day in, day out to be absorbing in your foot. But the Ultra Lone Peak is sort of like a natural movement style shoe that is fairly popular. And I would say that the other thru hiking shoes that are in that vein that are popular have picked up some of those details. So they tend to have wider toe boxes, wider soles generally, and overall a little bit less arch support and like less heel drop than they did previously. This could be a whole episode podcast of its own, Alex. We can talk about shoes for 5 seconds.
Yes. Well, we can talk about it for a little bit longer. Because I think the key is that you can get a lot of these benefits, that you're talking about and still have some cushioning, right? Like there are zero drop shoes or minimal drop shoes that do have cushioning. So it's not like, I don't know, I think people are worried or nervous about taking the full leap into like wearing a barefoot shoe.
Yeah, we talked to Morgan Brosnahan, who is a physical therapist that has a van and travels the length of the PCT, helping hikers deal with overuse injuries as they crop up. And she had a ton of useful footwear advice in our story on best thru hiking shoes and also on her website, Blaze Physio. And something very important that she pointed out was that you can't just take a shoe that's completely different from what you've been using previously and start pounding out 20 miles a day in them and think that is going to work out fine. Your feet, the rest of your body, need time to strengthen and develop those muscles and ligaments. So I would say the trend towards trail running shoes in general is because hiking boots were not providing the benefits that thru hikers needed, and that the trend towards the more natural movement style shoes is that this is a group that is strengthening gradually and slowly over time. And so if they're able to get those shoes to work, then they notice benefits in the form of less knee pain by the end of the trail or less hip pain by the end of the trail because there's not as much of that shock reverberating up through the rest of their body. So
could you describe what an overuse injury, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, an overuse injury would be like shin splints.
Yeah.
Or plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendonitis. Sort of it's not the same thing as your muscles being so tired that you can't keep hiking. It's when the soft tissue that's holding your body together starts to get stressed and strained, and then you have to stop and take care of that before you can continue hiking. So, and that comes up a lot for people who are trying to hike 2,600 miles in 5 months.
Yeah.
So a lot of stress on those different body types.
Yeah. I think a lot of backpackers could handle hiking 25 miles in a day or doing that a couple days in a row, but doing it, week after week after week, that's different. That's a lot different than what people are used to putting their body through, just in our modern world. We don't walk that much, let alone cover challenging terrain and, climbing up mountains and down canyons and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Sort of the overarching goal of ultralight backpacking is to make backpacking a sustainable activity, not something where you head out for your weekend and you wreck your body and then you come back and recuperate over the course of the work week, but something that you could just do continuously.
Yeah.
And feel good. So
yeah, I think a lot of people look at backpacking, especially backpack hunters. That I'm pretty sure that's how we all look at it, of well, I can get in there with this backpack and I can get out with it once. I can survive this for 1 week and I'll heal up after that. It'll be fine. But your mentality, the thru hiker mentality, you can't do that, right? Because you need months to achieve these things. So you have to be able to do this for the long hike, for the long run.
Yeah. One of the best pieces of advice I read before our PCT thru hike was in Yogi's Handbook, which is like the self-published like how-to guide on hiking the PCT that was like the Bible for through hiking the PCT for a long time and still is for many people. And she said, don't think of this as one 2,600-mile hike. Think of this as 26 100-mile hikes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When you think of it like that, it's like you have to finish a 100-mile hike and like be ready to do it again.
Right. The next day.
Take a day off and then go out again. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move beyond footwear so you don't get bogged down there. How about some other just like general items, either camping or hiking, accessories, stuff like that. I think that stuff is really relevant to everyone, backpack hunters, backpackers, even kind of like the weekend warrior who just is interested in cool gear. So what's out there in the world of ultralight gear that, that listeners should know about?
Yeah, this is kind of a tough question to answer in ways, because when I was considering like what is the gear that is like the it gear for ultralight backpackers and thru hikers, it doesn't change as much as you would expect. Once that group finds something that works, they tend to stick with it and kind of can't be turned off of it until something else really shows up and proves itself. So like a good example of this is the Thermarest Neo Ear X-Lite, which is like been the sleeping pad that almost every thru hiker has used on thru hikes for like over a decade.
Yeah.
It just is that sweet spot of like durability and weight and warmth. And they're just going to keep using it until something better shows up. So, and that kind of trickles out to a lot of other types of gear too. So yeah. And that's nice for me as a gear reviewer, because I find it really frustrating when you've reviewed a tent and then you find out that they just like completely changed the tent. And then you're like, okay, so all my testing work from last year is now kaput. That doesn't count anymore. So for our backpacking and tent coverage in this space, we'll be including all of the gear that we've tested in previous iterations in our roundups going forward, because it hasn't changed. And if it does change in some way that is substantial, then we will go back and retest it. So, but yeah, I think that's something that's like really positive. So when I think about like what is the gear that should be on more general backpackers' radars that thru hikers and ultralight backpackers have been using, one that really jumps to mind is the squeeze bag water filter. We are way past having to use the pump filters. A squeeze bag filter is essentially like a bag that you fill with water. You twist your filter onto the end of it, and then you squeeze down on the bag to push the water out. And this is no more difficult than using a pump filter, and it takes up a lot less space and is a lot, more importantly to me, is a lot less likely to become contaminated than when you have a bunch of like hoses and pumps that you're trying to like make sure like don't get mismatched into the wrong place. So we brought a few of those on this latest gear trip to sort of figure out, of the three top contenders, the Katadyn Be Free and the Platypus Quick Draw and the Sawyer Squeeze, like which one is really the best? But the answer is they're all great. And they're like $30, so they don't even cost that much.
There's a clear winner. There's a clear winner here. Right? It's the Be Free.
Yeah. The Be Free is really fast. It's hard to get out that last little bit of water in the Be Free because of like the filter being housed inside of the bag as opposed to outside of the bag the way it is like with the Sawyer and the Platypus Quick Draw.
No, it's way better. If you're listening to this, just get the Be Free. You'll thank me later.
Alex has gone full ultralight because that is the most ultralight of those three options. So
yeah, I loved it. I'll happily go with any ultralight things when I see that they work, which I think is the other thing that the ultralight gear and ultralight evangelists like yourself have to kind of contend with. Is there's this idea that the ultralight stuff is cool, but when you get out there, it's going to break. It's going to wear out really quickly. Mm-hmm. It's super expensive. And it's just generally not as durable as the traditional gear. But that's not really true anymore. Not
true. Yeah, it did used to be true. So I want to be fair to that point. Like when we hiked the PCT back in 2014, the sort of like ultralight backpack from Z-Packs that had this impossibly low weight to us at the time, they sold it with a disclaimer that it was only going to last a single thru hike.
Wow.
And that was going to be it. Wow. It was just going to fall apart after that. And ultralight gear today is not like that. And like part of that is that I think the companies know that once someone's had their first taste of a long trail, that can inspire them to sort of tear apart their whole life and become sort of a nomad, just hiking the long trails of America and the world. And people need gear that can last because then they have no money. And it's also like there's been a development in like the materials that are out there too. So now we have materials like Ultra that are just more robust and stronger and lighter than some of those materials that they were using previously. Yeah. And also just we've had more thru hikers since then that have just broken a lot of gear.
Yeah.
And so now people know what gear doesn't break and that's what they buy.
Yeah.
As opposed to the gear that does break. So,
yeah.
And there will always be a place in ultralight backpacking for astronomically priced gear that will fall apart, but weighs 2 ounces less than everything else. But we'll be honest with you at Outdoor Life about which products those are. So you can prioritize what's important to you.
Yeah. And that, with any gear item, there are trade-offs. If you want to make something light, you have to use different materials, and that could either relate to cost or that could relate to durability. With any engineering of any product, there are trade-offs if you want to, optimize for a certain quality. But I think what I learned through all of this is that the trade-offs with the ultralight gear ultimately are worth it. Like the backpacks are comfortable. The tents are easy to set up. The trail running shoes are way faster. They're easier on your legs. Yeah, a lot of the gear really is very practical. Not even if you're having to do or wanting to do a thru hike, but just if you want to carry less weight. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't know.
It always feels better to carry less weight. It always feels better.
Yeah, it always feels better. At one point, I swapped backpacks with an experienced thru hiker whose pack weighed 20 pounds. And as a hunter, I'm used to carrying a pack that weighs at least 40 pounds, sometimes upwards of 80 to 100 pounds if it's, loaded up with meat. And to me, any backpack weighing 20 pounds, it's going to be comfortable. Like that is just it's not a lot of weight, even over a long distance. You can carry that very comfortably. You can hike as fast as you want to. There's just a ton of benefits for having a tiny little pack like that. Now you won't be able to do that all the time, like you said, but when you can, it's pretty fun.
Yeah. And something I found through my own backpacking is that when you have that as your base to start with, then that kind of opens up the possibilities to do other things, to like bring other things with you. When my daughter, who's now about to turn 5, when she was 2, we took her on like a 32-mile section of the Wonderland Trail, like over like 2 nights. And the only way you can do something like that is to carry her. One of the adults has to carry her and the other adult has to carry like everything else. And you can't have the other adult carrying everything else on the Wonderland Trail unless they have a lot lighter gear to start with.
Yeah.
So yeah, just sort of like means that your adventures can like take so many different kinds of forms than they would if you're starting with a pack that weighs like 30 pounds. So
yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for this, Laura. And thanks for, opening my eyes to the ultralight world. I'm still not like a 100% believer. As an editor, I retain some skepticism, but I am really excited about this content category. And I'm really excited to see your stories, which will be coming out over the next several weeks on outdoorlife.com.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming with us on this backpacking gear test and experiencing it all firsthand.
Okay.
It's great to have you.
I'm ready for the next one. Let me know where it is.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited by Mike Pedersen of 85 Audio. It's hosted by our editor-in-chief, Alex Robinson. And it's produced by me, executive editor Natalie Krebs. For more ultralight insight from Laura, go to outdoorlife.com/ultralight. That's outdoorlife.com/ultralight. Music in this episode was composed and performed by Pierre Locatelli via APM Music.